It is always a pleasure to chat with you. I was so excited to have a conversation with you in my closet because that's where my podcast is recorded. Studio C. And if you ever come out to BC,
I didn't know where you're going to go with that.
I would never invite anyone to go into the closet with me. But I came out of the closet in, February 2020, right before the pandemic was called. And I came out of the closet to declare that I believe there is more than one way to homeschool a child. And, I got introduced to the idea through John Holt's book, How Children Fail. And then yours and John Holt's book, Teach Your Own, and so many wonderful, ideas and stories and statistical research that really helps support all of that through your Growing Without Schooling writings as well. So thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, Teresa. Thanks for inviting me.
And thanks for having a genuinely life-changing impact on my homeschool, my family, the way I think about life.
Wow. Well, you're welcome.
It's really true. I was telling my son. I was
just writing into the void.
Well, we go into this homeschool thing with good intentions. We want to provide our kids all the things. We want to, different people will put different words to that differently, but we want freedom for our kids. We want all the good things for our families. And then we sit them down at the kitchen table and we say, we need to do these things from 8 to 4. And here's the script. And really, we just transferred all that approach or that non-freedom into our homes. And y'all definitely helped me shift away from that mindset.
Great. I'm happy.
Yeah.
That's my goal.
So recently you released, 7 thoughts from John Holt,
8
free ebook.
Right. John Holt's 8 great ideas about unschooling.
8. Yes. Would you say that was a summary of all the things that you've seen him share?
Yeah, what I was trying to do is summarize the rationale for unschooling, for not following the school schedule. And because, this was true when I got started in homeschooling back in 1981. The first thing I thought was, well, you got to do it like school. How are you going to get in college unless you do it like school? And John opened my eyes, showed me all the different ways, all the different types of schools there were. Even then, this is before charter school.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of charter schools are just mimicking school, but with a theme or something. But and that's why unschooling exists.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean John's goal was never to destroy the schools.
Yeah.
He didn't want to defund them. He never asked. He never said that's what we should do. He said they should cooperate, and if they don't, we'll walk with our feet away and do something else, and we can come back if we need to. But we want to show them something different and prove that that this can work. And John had the confidence that it would because he'd worked with alternative schools and he met homeschooling families before he finally committed. But for most people, even today, we don't understand what self-directed learning means. I see it on my YouTube thing. There's this famous video clip of John Holt on the Donahue Show. And it's the whole show. He was on the show, I think, twice, maybe 3 times, but twice. And this is the last time he was on it. And so people had already gotten a dose of John Holt already. And, people are just shocked in this video that you think that you could do what a teacher does. And
right.
I'm raising my children. They're not even school age yet, and they're learning. And, people forget that, growth is inevitable. It doesn't need to be managed. It can be encouraged or discouraged, but, that doesn't necessarily, need to be managed.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about on the podcast. My podcast is the Homeschool Mama Self-Care Podcast. And just this week, I released that conversation between you and I. That concept of learning is natural. It is not something that needs to be prescribed. And somehow, along with the conventional educational approach or delivery method of an education, we get this notion that learning can't be accomplished without the things that are within that method. but actually, we talked about breathing, or breathing being a natural thing that we do, or drinking water. We need water, but those things, nobody says you should go to school to figure out how to breathe or how to drink water. And the same thing with learning.
Right, right. In fact, I'm glad you said that, because in the very first thing that I put in this ebook, the free ebook, is a quote from John from the book Learning All the Time, and in it he says, "It is true in a way, and misleading in a way to say that children want to learn. Yes, they do, but in the same way that they want to breathe."
Yes.
Learning more than breathing is not an act of volition for young children. They do not think, now I am going to learn this or that. It is in their nature to look about them, to make the world in their senses and make sense of it, without knowing at all how they do it, or even if they are doing it.
Yes, exactly. And there's this idea that you've got 18 years to learn and then you move on with the rest of your life. But actually, you and I were just talking before I pressed record, that every bit of technology in the last 6 years that I've learned required me to say, why do I want to learn the thing? And how do I figure it out? And mostly I went to YouTube. I had a couple coaches, I had a variety of people, but mostly I was self-directed in that learning. And so it turns out, not 18, I'm sure this is a surprise, but, and I'm 50 and I'm still learning.
Yeah. And what I think most of us adults forget is that we learned through the computer revolution. I remember the early days, places like CompUSA would offer computer classes, but they didn't last very long. In 3 to 5 years, they stopped doing that. Was people were able to teach themselves, or more often their children showed them how to use the computer, or their grandkids. But we forget. I mean, when ATMs came out, people were like, oh, yeah, how am I going to get my money? We figured that out in no time.
Yeah, we're motivated.
Yeah, exactly. And these are things that are part of life. They're not artificial, like, say learning Latin. We don't encounter Latin too often in our lives. So, and so many other things. I mean, we could get into that if we want to go into the whole curriculum idea. But basically, we learn by being free to think about the world. Yes, and that leads us to build our knowledge. There's this, I think it's called constructivism, and it's a theory of education where they claim that the child builds knowledge, which of course is true, but then they say that school and teacher help construct that knowledge, and this is where it gets dicey. I mean, my conception of how math works, I can't take that out and put it in your head. You have to figure out how math works and get the conception of how that works. And this whole idea that everything must be taught. And classes. My kids have taken classes. Community college is great for that, especially for teen homeschoolers. I'm not saying you don't learn anything, that everything has to be self-taught. But we have way, way too much formal schooling, and it has just filled the time of our children's lives to the point where, I think it was in today's New York Times or something I read this morning, was an article about a family in Britain that got them, that was able to close a road down for 2 hours a day outside their home so that the neighborhood children can play. And what they found out was the kids started to get to know each other, and that they didn't need any parents. They didn't want any parents around. And like the whole neighborhood, it brought the parents together. Families that hadn't known each other or just knew the faces across the street. We forget that this is, we're humans. We learn through interaction. We learn through socialization. I mean, schools are all hung up on socialization, but what did they do during COVID? They forced everyone to sit behind a computer, just like they sit behind a desk in school. Like, come on.
Oh, man. Having conversations with you is like my head goes pop, pop, like popcorn kernel. And I'm like, oh, let's go here, let's go there, let's go there. I'm thinking two thoughts at one time, but one is this concept of lifelong love of learning. I hear a lot of homeschool parents say, I want my kids to have a lifelong love of learning. And I actually take issue with that because I think we were meant to learn. And the only reason you might not like to learn is because somebody got in the way and messed with that desire to learn, period.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then the other thing is when you talk about, the conventional schooled method of or delivery of education, the intention there is to give them or construct this, all these learning things. But what you really do is you force kids to sit in a classroom so that they turn off their agency or a sense of autonomy. And when at 18, we say, okay, you've learned enough, you're graduated, here's your diploma, walk across the stage, flip the tassel, and now you can go live your life on purpose. But they haven't had any agency or autonomy until that point.
Mhm.
So a little confusing.
That's right. That's right. And there are so many things, just about the conventional school system that haven't changed in decades, despite effort. I mean, look at the failure in reading instruction.
Yeah.
In America, I don't know what it's like in Canada, but in the U.S., they just thought 20 years they've been following this method, and they're saying it hasn't improved or helped children learn to read. It's actually gotten in the way, they claim. And again, it's just like, must we always? It's always got to be like this top-down grand idea.
Yeah.
What I mean, John Holt wrote about this in Learning All the Time, and actually, I think in How Children Learn too. It's sensible phonics. I mean, it's not whole language or phonics. It's both. And depending on the child's development and acclivity towards reading, phonics may be the best way to approach it, or then a mixture of phonics and a whole language.
Yeah.
My middle daughter was born with meningitis, and so she had a hearing deficit, and so she spoke, haltingly and so on. But she couldn't, and so phonics embarrassed her because of the way she spoke. Whole language worked great. She was so proud. Exit, slow. She'd see those signs and point to them. And so we got it, and she wound up doing phonics later. And it was the Harry Potter books that got her. It really wasn't until they came along, and so that would have been around third, fourth, maybe even fifth grade. And so we had an early reader in our family, which is our youngest. No one knows. We suspect her sisters taught her how to read.
Mm-hmm.
They read a lot to her.
Read to her a lot. Yeah.
Exactly. But my oldest learned to read the classical way. We made, read to her a lot, and then, used Post-it notes with prefixes and suffixes to explain the different, sounds of the words. And then my middle daughter, as I said, so there's 3 different methods right in my own family. Imagine a class of 20. But no, we all have to do it this way.
I think there's I don't think it's just an educational concept, and I'd love to explore this thought with you, but it's not so much educational, the education approach. It's not just that. It's also our entire culture, or the way the West in general thinks, is that you have to meet certain standards, or you have to meet certain outcomes in your life, not just learning outcomes, but life outcomes at certain points. And if you don't, then you haven't succeeded. And that is so simple, and assumes that everyone is exactly the same, which we're not. And are we here all for the exact same reasons? I definitely can see that's not the case. We know it's not the case, but we treat it like it is.
That's right. That's right. And there's so, how can I put it? There's a variety of ways that I'm kind of stumped here. I'm trying to find the right word. So essentially, what it is what I'm trying to say is the assumptions that we make about why children should learn take control over the actual reasons why children learn. The assumptions like, well, everybody in my class has to read by the end of 3rd grade, right? This is a general assumption in school, right? And therefore in school, if you're not reading by 3rd grade, you're damaged, or you're not up to snuff or whatnot. And but there's no biological reason why anyone needs to learn to read then. It's not like, puberty where suddenly, development happens and all of a sudden you get the reading gene explosion in your brain. No, it's a learned behavior. And, but school just treats people. And again, I think it's because school got started in the Industrial Revolution. It was a factory model in top-down hierarchical management, and children are widgets, to be molded into adults. And that regardless, I mean, John Dewey, a lot of people spoke out about this, but it didn't seem that much effect, because schools still treat them this way. You're damaged goods if you can't learn by the end of third grade. Now you're termed learning disabled. Right. And that's a whole nother can of worms. I'm not saying they don't exist, but I'm saying they're way overdiagnosed. And,
right. You're making something big out of something that isn't really even there.
Right.
By the way, that's me. Because I remember, I don't remember my mom. My brother and I were talking that I don't remember her actually reading to us when we were really little. Whereas my husband had loads of reading to him. And so by the time I was in grade 1, 1980, I think 1979. And so at that time, I remember them beginning to shift into phonics, or was it the other way around? But I was like, I can't figure this out. I don't get it. And only 3 or 4 times at the back of the classroom, that's all I needed to spend time with my teacher and to be separate from the other part of the class to discover, I don't understand anything. I'm dumb. I had that mindset. And meanwhile, I have read a lot since 17. That's when I got motivated. I have read a lot. And that hasn't been an issue for me. In fact, it might have motivated me more to dig into books because I didn't spend time reading before. Mm-hmm. So it's a contrived timeline, I would say.
Yeah. And also you make a very good point, about how school made you ashamed because you weren't there. And this was something John Holt picked up on, right? And it took him a long time. He talked 10 or 15 years before he wrote his first book. But in that book, How Children Fail, that's where he wrote, "School is the place where children learn to be stupid."
Yeah.
And he explained how fear, boredom, and resistance are interpreted as stupidity in school.
Yes.
And get that label and push you on. And we forget that, school isn't all peaches and cream, and it's not like everyone, has a great time. And it doesn't have to be that way, John was very fond of talking about alternative schools, but then, as he realized, there were just soft jails because more often than not, the teachers were giving into to the desires of the parents or of the faculty to make the kids do certain things, so the school looks good. It takes a real bold alternative school leader to really stick to their guns, and that's why it's a little easier for individual families.
So that's interesting you say that, because I actually think that we tend, not everyone, but many families tend to take on the hard route of insisting that they do a certain approach or curriculum or method. And require it to happen, push the kids into it, and then find themselves really dissatisfied, and also seeing the kids not happy, not learning, not caring anymore. The same thing as school.
You're absolutely right, and that's I think one of the reasons why people turn towards unschooling. Yes. And they don't want to go all the way because they see people living in the woods with and stuff like that. So I'm not going to.
Should I turn my computer around? I'm living in the woods.
But that's not. I mean, that's not how it is. I mean, there's all sorts of different people that do it, and what we're trying to say is that just because your child, we don't have to treat children like everyone's on the assembly line. We know that any pediatrician is going to tell you that there's an age range for development. If your child's not walking at 4 months or 6 months, there's no worry. We'll think, give them time. It was interesting. My daughter's who had meningitis, so she had apraxia, speech issues. Yeah. And I took her to a speech therapist. My wife was very, very concerned about this. So we took her there, and I asked the therapist, I said, "Will this go away on its own?" And she says, "Oh, yeah, usually by 5 or 6. It was my daughter, by the way, was only 3 or 4 at the time. And then I said, oh, well, we'll wait. And then she says, yeah, but once she goes to preschool, kids are going to make fun of her. And that's, and that's a big issue for children with apraxia. Right. And that's when I realized, well, we're homeschooling her, and it could be a lot gentler.
You're fine. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, we stuck with her for about 3 sessions, I think. It was like, okay. Yeah, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. Good. So and I think the same thing's true with a lot of behavioral issues. Just because they're happening now doesn't mean they're going to happen forever.
Right.
But it's really hard to have that patience, and especially in a school. I mean, right now, they're so understaffed, and and there's the emotional issues that children have been suffering since COVID. I mean, I keep reading, and I just taught summer camp. I've done this this is my 5th year now, teaching magic. So I have nobody but students who want to learn what I want to share. Right? It's a great situation, and I love it. But even there, I was really surprised this year. For the first time, I had a bunch of students who didn't want to perform, even though they're perfectly capable of it. We perform for the younger group kids, 5 and unders, and I'm teaching like 3rd grade to 8th graders, so up to 12 years old. And I've had kids say that they were shy, they didn't want to do it. That's fine, you don't have to perform. But these kids that I was talking to, I said, if it's stage fright, let's talk. I mean, stage fright's natural, and I was explaining to them, they were just going to go down to the picnic tables and show them a couple of these card tricks and the ball tricks and stuff. And this girl and her friend looked at me and just said, "You don't understand. We're really anxious." And I went, "Yeah, it's stage fright, right?" And she says, "No, I have a lot of anxiety." And I just had to take a step back and let it be. I was like, I didn't expect that answer. It was like, too big an issue to do. I was like, okay, you don't have to perform. But it's like, wow, I never had an 8-year-old tell me they had too much anxiety. I mean, that was like, where did they even get that concept? Like, well, COVID.
Culture. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's interesting. Yeah. That was. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that was just a week ago.
A week ago. Yeah.
Process all this, it's like, it was definitely. It was a great experience, but definitely a little different this time.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so, do you do that every year?
This is the 5th year I've done it. Yeah, I enjoy doing it. Yeah, 2 weeks. Wow. All day I teach the beginning class from 9 to 12, and then the advanced class from 12:30 to 2:30.
My son, he's 15 now, but he absolutely loved that, the magic, and being homeschooled. He just didn't have the same kind of, awareness that people were watching. So, we were doing videos and he was letting me, use them in whatever capacity. And he was not nervous about it. But I do recall him starting a podcast. Yes, really, at about 8 or 9, because he figured it out because he's a kid. And he was really recreating the things that he learned in history. And it was so clever. It's so cute. And then someone he knew in real life had identified that he was doing it and commented, and that was it. He was done. So it could have been an amazing tool to recreate some of the things he was learning, but he was scared. You mentioned a really significant moment you had with John Holt, where he said to you that you don't want to be a teacher. You are going to just work on them instead of work with them. Is that the way he said that?
That's right.
I'm curious. Can you elaborate on how or what that really means inside the homeschool home?
Sure. In the homeschooling situation, I'm trying to think of an example from my own life, but I can't. So sure. Let me think. In general, if a child walks up and let's say they're learning basic math, and you've decided that you're going to have lessons or use a workbook or something, and you're doing it. And things are fine, and then after like a couple of days or whatever, the kid says, "I don't want to do this right now." Right? Yeah. It's your home. And if you think that a child cannot learn to sit still and listen to a lecture or watch a movie, unless you take every minute to impose your will on them. You can, you're homeschooling. You have you could actually, whatever it is, if it's 10 problems or just, trying to understand how like basic algebra works. What does it mean to solve for X, and like kids pulling their hair out? I don't understand it. Stop. Change the topic.
Yeah.
No one, there's no principal going to run down the hall. No parent's going to call up and say, "You didn't work with my child hard enough. You didn't spend enough time." It's like, and this is the thing. I wrote about this on the blog a few months ago, I think. Whose fault is it? A teacher, a woman wrote into Growing Without Schooling, a homeschooling mom, that she was talking to a teacher about her decision to homeschool her child, and the teacher said, "Well, you realize if it doesn't work, if the child doesn't learn anything, it's your fault." And then she said, "Well, isn't it true then that if the child doesn't learn in school, it's your fault?" And she says, "No, it's the child's fault."
Yes, I heard you say that on the podcast, and I was like,
I mean,
whose fault is it anyways? Why does it have to be someone's fault?
Yeah, what's the race?
Exactly.
The race is because salaries and reputations and blah 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 are on the line, but
standardized testing
to the child.
Yes.
The child is like, "My brain is exploding. I can't deal with this right now." Or conversely, "I really want to learn this." I've had that experience too, and I've read about a lot, which I've intensely want. And then we got to find you somebody who knows even more about this and get involved.
And understands your challenge. Yeah, that was me too. I've had that too. I think,
right.
that is my.
Go ahead.
I'm going to wait.
So, in either case, it's up to you to just say, "Okay, we could change." This idea that they have to learn discipline at the same time they're learning science. Well, if the science experiment is going wrong and then they, throw their hands up or whatnot, that's not the time to sit down and give them the discipline. No, you got to finish this. It's like, well, what's going on? How did it go wrong? All right, let's we'll look at this tomorrow. You're too upset, or this is just, we're bored. We've had enough of this for today. We don't do that. People forget that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, that right there is a beautiful relationship, or a statement about the relationship between knowing how to address our own big emotions, which is also something I do in coaching with moms. Know how to address your own big emotions, understand what it means for your brain to be on overload and feel foggy or confused in big emotion, and recognize, listen, your kiddo who is struggling with, say, that science experiment not gone right, and he or she is frustrated, you have to stop. And it might not be your instinct. You might say, no, we're going to force through it anyways, or that child needs to be disciplined. But reality is they're not actually in the room with you. So even if you force it, which will influence the relationship you have in a negative way, but it will also not actually help anybody learn.
Those are wise words. Yes, absolutely.
Learn from experience. I'll tell you, I've been that mom, although not with science experiments. Probably with math.
Yeah, and that I think is a really important point, Teresa. We learn as we go along.
Yeah.
The teacher comes out of teacher's college, sits down, and they know everything. It's like, no, a teacher takes a long time to get seasoned and know what's going on.
Yes.
It's okay. Everyone just thinks we have to be the perfect teacher from the get-go. And certainly the curriculum people make you feel that way, with all you got to buy this, you got to buy that, you got to take this, you got to have support. I mean, it's amazing. And, it's a business, I subscribe to Education Week. Here it goes. It's all a business.
Yes.
So go ahead.
Yeah. No, I'm curious, what value do you get from, studying the conventional system?
Well, not to make the mistakes they're making, number one. And also I see ways the main problem with education today is that we've just reduced it to instruction.
Right.
We don't value social skills, and other than how to behave in a classroom.
Yes.
But and we need children to see, and the whole culture needs to see that it hasn't always been this way. School hasn't been all inclusive of children's lives. So you don't have to go back to the 1950s and see. I think most kids spend like 4 to 6 hours in school, you know, and then it's just more hours and then the argument, well, that's because the world has gotten more complicated. We have computers now. Well, I've been living with computers for 40 years now, and all I can say is they've screwed up my life more than anything else. The internet is so broken, I'm so sick of technology, but we have to live with it.
Here we are. Yeah.
Yeah. And, but to think that our children won't learn about this stuff unless they're exposed to it in school for 12 years. I mean, that doesn't jive with any human experience,
No.
Our own,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting. That always is my question with when I'm working with women. Typically, I'm working with homeschool moms. So what do you believe in education to be anyway? And if we can get really clear on that and then release ourselves from these unhelpful mindsets, AKA deschooling, then we actually enjoy the process more. We're less unrealistic and we're not whipping the kids into gear. Right. And turns out all of that actually produces a more purposeful life. Mm-hmm. It feels more intentional and less crazy in your head. And, you spoke about Ivan Illich, and he is like, would you say the father of deschooling?
Well, he wrote the book Deschooling Society, yes.
Yeah. So what would you say now, like some of the concepts that he shares in that, do you find relevant to, home education or homeschool families nowadays? Are there certain ones you would emphasize?
Well, Ivan was talking about the broader picture of education, where John Holt was talking about the specific teacher-pupil aspect.
Yes.
But what and why John studied with him, he flew down to Mexico to study with Ivan. It was that Ivan had this. I mean, he was a Catholic priest. He worked in the Vatican. There's a special name for his division, but it was like the history of ecclesiastic of how the church was created and its rituals and so on. And he was very, very well versed in that. And so, and he saw how like modern day society is built upon the church, because the church was built upon the Holy Roman Empire. And that's how they were able, to control these huge empires, with this hierarchical structure. And he saw how that sort of got permeated society in many different ways. So he brought a really interesting angle to all this. And the other thing that he pointed out, and very well, is how other cultures, don't have schools, or the children learn by being part of, and also historically. That's the other thing. I mean, he points out, historically how all this happens, and then he has his own personal story, which he doesn't talk about much, but in books like I think it's Ivan Illich in Conversation, where they reproduce his interviews. He talks about, I mean, it's really interesting how, as a young boy, his father was a diplomat in Austria. He grew up in Vienna, and his dad would have all these people over to the house, high-ranking people from other countries. But he allowed Ivan to stay under the table, the dinner table, or be in the periphery and listen. And, nice. And Ivan, I mean, the man spoke something like 11 languages and fluently. It was an amazing person to be around. What a forceful personality. But in his story, so to get to the point of the story, so his dad was this, but I one parent was Jewish, the other parent was Catholic. Mm-hmm. And then the Germans came into Austria, took it over, so they had to hide their son. So they sent him to an island in Dalmatia, I think it was, where he was given, put in the Catholic school right away and just raised in the Catholic tradition, right? And what he remembers most of that time is the trucks that had these huge loudspeakers on them, He said that it was in Vienna and then in Dalmatia later. And he said, and it was just the Germans screaming each other, telling them what was going to happen, what they had to do, where they had to go. It was the first time he ever heard that. And then I'll never forget when I met Ivan in the 1980s, he started talking, and this is 1980s. He started saying how the screens in our lives remind him very much of the Nazi loudspeakers. He says, I can't go through an airport with one of these screens talking at me, telling me what I should do or why I should be doing something. Yeah,
very interesting.
Making these links.
Yeah. Hard not to see that. Yeah, that is. Yes. I think anyone could identify with those concepts for sure. Right. Welcome to algorithms. And yeah. Mm-hmm.
And both John Holt and Ivan, John didn't have children and Ivan was a priest, but they saw how this was having negative effects on childhood because they at least still remember their childhood and stayed in touch with children.
Yeah. Interesting. Just a discussion of, so it's Ivan, not Ivan, as I was saying. Yes. Ivan Illich. Yeah. Okay, now I know for sure. And he really was speaking to what I hear anyways, tying in with some other understanding I have about, and I won't go here, but political systems and things like that, that really institutionalizing in whatever form, whether it's healthcare or education or government, all of the different ways of institutionalizing, just take the life out of life and just force us as little minions to follow the path and not really think and not really live, autonomously. So I hear that with him right from the Roman Empire.
Well, one of his concepts that you just mentioned. See, when I asked, because he spoke, when I would go down to State College when he spoke here with my friends. And we spend the weekend with him, and he would have people from Japan, Iran, and France. He would talk to them in their native languages and then translate for us in the room. It was amazing. But oh gosh, I just saw this. Oh, but he had this phrase, exactly what you just said about institutions. He identified this back in deschooling society. We called it the paradoxical counterproductivity of institutions, meaning right? So the Department of Transportation creates highways that create more traffic jams that back up traffic into the city. Medicine 100%. Creates all these illnesses and treatments that require an insurance company, and we see it now with the computer. The internet is so broken right now. I have to change my password every day for something, it seems. And, things grow beyond, this is another point of scale. There, there is a scale. And again, his experience of World War II probably, showed him that, how, it was a sheer force of scale that, that the Germans took over these places.
That's a remarkable story. Yeah.
Yeah.
And those connections.
A remarkable person. Yeah.
Yeah.
But think about the scale. Yeah. The scale today for children, right? The internet. It's the whole world in the universe that they could have access to, right? And yet we have problems finding them friends, right?
Right.
That's a big thing in homeschooling. That's always been finding friends. So we're more tuned to that. But we all assume, you go to school, you find friends.
Right.
That's not happening. We don't have much recess in school. This is another reason why if school can't provide these things, because the education machine has to keep punching out its quotas. We have other institutions that we can create, or public parks where people can use equipment and put on performances or just play and practice things. Having. I remember in Britain after World War II, there was this famous movement to help painters. They had people teach other people how to paint, and coal miners got really into this, and they were shocked at how the coal miners enjoyed going to their painting classes. Right?
That is interesting.
There's all, and just like I said, just this experiment that these two moms tried in England, where how can we get our kids to play more outside? Well, get the cars off the road. Get
out of the way. Yes. Right? That is very much that deschooling concept I always talk about. deschooling your unhelpful schooled mindsets, but really they're institutional mindsets. And ultimately, it is just get out of the kids' way, because they learn because they learn because they learn. And we just layer in these things that aren't really useful for them. And then they, just like you said, don't learn. And then everything slows down.
Right. Right. And, a lot of it is, I don't think it's a meanness built into teachers or principals.
No, not at all. Or homeschool parents doing it that way. No,
Yeah,
not
I mean,
either. I was that one.
Yeah, I mean, we went through the system. Whether it's
Yes.
private or public, it's pretty much the same, in terms of structure. And and we have to acknowledge. I mean, that's what John got fired from all his jobs, because his classes were noisy. They didn't follow the curriculum exactly, and other kids wanted to join his classes because they were more fun. How dare you talk about having fun in school?
Yes. I actually was a mandatory volunteer in my oldest child's first grade before I even knew about homeschooling. And I was told to come at this time of the week and then take 6 kids, go into another room and help them read. I got no instruction. And at that time, the idea of teaching someone to read was like, am I building the entire spaceship or what? I have no idea.
The pool, right?
I have no idea. And so then I bring these kids into the other room, and there's a kid there that I'd later find out has ADHD, and it's full blown. He will not sit still. He's constantly distracting the other 6. And I'm like, she gave me this kid. He's the funnest kid in the room, of course. And then he wouldn't sit still. And I'm like, well, I can't use these readers, and we can't do what we're doing. So I'm like, okay, so I'm going to give you a line and you can act it out. And then I told the other kids they could do it as well. And so they figured it out. It was fun, probably half hour. I come back into the classroom, apparently later than I was supposed to. The grade 1 teacher is like, that was too long. And I'm like, I don't know. They read though.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, that's just it. Run, school, run. It's like, a train or a manufacturing product line. I mean, you got to get out of this mentality and get more into the growth mentality.
Yes.
And if they don't, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I've been here 40 years now. How many kids that I know and families that I've published stories about, the kids go in and out of school, no difficulty.
Yeah.
They get into college if they want to go, and some of them excel.
Yeah.
I mean, but school doesn't seem interested in that. It's like, if this were a medicine, we would all be, they'd be examining us like crazy. Like, why aren't you, getting the same problems that all our other patients have? How can you be doing this without our medicine? Instead, it's just like schools are like, oh, you're just going to fail. And despite the fact that, and
they're not.
And it could be so much better if they would cooperate, because they would receive funding for the homeschooling students. I don't know how the funding works, in Canada, but here it's just like, if the child is enrolled in the school, your money goes to the state fund.
100%. Don't get me started.
Yeah, right.
Definitely, absolutely. I've said this when I was working in an advocacy organization in our province for home education. I said, I think we should have, what do we call it? Not funding, but the option to invest in the home education or in the school system. And they're like, please don't say that out loud. People will discount us immediately. And I'm like, yeah, but we should. We should. Yeah. So I'm curious how you actually help or how you would frame the discussion of deschooling with, say, someone even in the homeschool realm that has no idea of what deschooling means or why they should even care about it. Where would you start?
But a lot depends on the context of the conversation, of course. So, but I guess, if it was someone who was, a supporter of conventional school and just felt like homeschooling was sort of an abandonment of one's responsibility to learn, I would, usually with school people, I start with the idea that education is not the same as school.
Yes.
And try to explain how, because for years, in fact, in all John's early books, he would always use the example of the baby, right? And the baby learns without being taught. That's so clear.
Yeah.
I mean, every parent can see that. They learn to speak through trial and error. They learn to walk through trial and error. I can't tell you, Teresa, how many people tell me. There's a guy on my YouTube channel. I just had a little back and forth with last week saying my parents taught me how to walk and talk. And I've met parents who say that they taught they insist that their children would not learn these skills unless they had done it. And so how else would they learn reading and writing? And it's like, well, what about all the people who didn't learn to read and write without school, like William Shakespeare, and so on, and
many of us.
and not to mention the peasants who nonetheless could do calculations to know if they're getting the right amount of stuff from the purchaser or the seller and so on. Literacy exists. And that's another thing that Yvonne brought to the table, and that is that literacy exists throughout history. It's not just where we see it like a missionary.
The Gutenberg press and onward. Yeah.
It's like every culture has these ways of respecting how people learn. And John was always interested in that. The continuum concept by Jean Liedloff was a very foundational book for him because it really gave some research support. And then now there's even more. She was a self-taught anthropologist. And so now there's professional anthropologists who are verifying her work that yes, tribal people don't school their children. The children play on the periphery. They participate on the sides, and but they do learn how to use sharp objects and how to hunt and all these other things, without and again, it's more like this apprentice internship idea. This group learning, like being in a choir or something. But we for us, it's like this. I don't know why we're so focused on individual achievement. Like whoever learns it the quickest and the best, you're the one that we have to look up to, as opposed to like, well, let's see what you do with that knowledge in 12 years. And I'm glad I said that. We don't give unschooling and deschooling enough time. All the researchers that I've read about and met and talked about, almost, I mean, except for the ones like Peter Gray or Gene O'Reilly, who understand that it's that there is a growth component, and that growth is a broad category. But they complain that how can we compare unschooling achievement, when to the school kids, because this kid's not reading, so clearly unschoolers failed. And I said, well, no, I mean they may be reading within a year. You don't know that, And they say, well, that's not how it goes in school. It's like,
Touché.
It's like, wait a minute, are we talking about school or life? I mean, I want my child to be able to read when they're adults and they're in the real world. I'm not too worried about an 8-year-old who's struggling with reading.
Right.
I mean, maybe they need glasses. You look into these things as a concerned parent, but you don't immediately just say, oh, my child is stupid and needs intensive study. Maybe they have reading disabilities and blah, blah, blah. I mean, wait, there's plenty of time to figure that stuff out.
So you need more time. In the beginning, when I first came across every single good book in my life that had a huge impact on my life, I accidentally picked up on some bookshelf somewhere. And that was How Children Fail by John Holt, was the one that just started something very different in my homeschool and in my family, frankly, in my life. It really did influence how I saw life. And in that book, the intention behind me reading that book was because I didn't want my children to fail. And that is what I think a lot of homeschool families, that in the back of their minds, they're thinking, I don't want my children to fail. So that's why I need to do things that look like what I knew were the right things to do. Conventional approaches. We'll tweak it a bit. We'll make less curriculum. We'll include more outdoor time, but we'll still keep forcing these things because those are the things that are, quote, proven, but they're not proven, because we can look at our own education and ask ourselves, did you have gaps? And the answer is always yes. And did the education serve you to become the person you were meant to be today? And I mean, really, who are you supposed to be in this life? What are you supposed to contribute? And is the stuff that you learned from K to 12, is that equipping you to be who you were meant to be? And if the answer isn't categorically yes, every class, every hour, every moment, then that's all you need to know. Relax. I mean, no, I shouldn't say that. That will never work.
I know, a little snippy, but yeah. But I'm with you. I'm with you.
I would literally never say that, by the way.
Right. But that's so true. That's so true. And but the problem is we are. And John wrote about this. I forget. I think it was How Children Learn. We were entrusted to learn as children.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we were set up this way in school.
Yes.
And really, to this day, I'm amazed how many people say, "Oh, well, if I want to learn such and such, I got to go to this community college class or take this course." It's like, what about reading a book? What about talking to someone in the field? What about, why must everything be a class? And we have to. I mean, and this is what people get upset with unschooling and deschooling, because they those words don't really adequately describe what we're talking about. They're saying, it's not do without. It's like you can't. Well, technically, you can do without, right? I mean, that's the other thing. But what we're saying is, if you need school and there's good teachers and good places to be, why wouldn't you use them? But do you really need them just because someone says, "Oh, you're 12 years old, you shouldn't be on the street"? Why don't you go study robotics? And, it's just like, well, there could be so many other options, and sure, I'd love there to be a maker space where a kid could go and make robots or something, but even that, like these maker spaces, I would love to see more of them, but they're not there. I mean, one in my public library that is largely being used for high school and college kids. It's like, well, let's get the younger kids in there.
We actually had one of those spaces here in the town that we live in the woods. We did have something like that, which was pretty cool. And my son was curious about it. But me, I mean, you'd never have found me at 8 to 12 in a space like that, even though it was completely new. It had zero interest for me. And I think we need to look at that and say, who is the child right in front of us? That's the one you're home educating. You're not home educating some randomized child or some average child, whatever that means.
Right.
You're not educating anyone but the child in front of you. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's hard enough for various reasons. It's only hard mostly because of the parenting role. And then you're having to figure out your stuff and how to relate to people and deal with all the things that you might not have dealt with before you were a parent. But the hard thing isn't letting them learn.
Yeah. Yeah. Alison Gopnik is a researcher out in Stanford, and in her book, The Carpenter and the Gardener, I think it's called.
Yes.
And she talks about how parenting has become a verb, and we make it that, but it should stay a noun. Be a parent. Don't do parenting.
Yes. Just be living alongside them, like we were talking about on the podcast. Yeah.
Don't have an agenda that was given to you by the housekeeping or the whatever. It's like, come on. Like you said, deal with the reality in front of you, and it'll be so much better. Because you're actually communicating in a real way instead of like using someone else's ideas about where your child should be and trying to make them fit that mold, and you're not really convinced of it because it's just an intellectual idea, but it comes from an authority. I mean, we really have to learn to trust ourselves more. And that's another thing. Like people say, "Oh, unschooling is all about hippie, being a hippie and living free and stuff," and they're missing the point. What John was always getting at was like, it's about self-sufficiency. Just because you grow a vegetable garden doesn't mean you're a hippie, or I mean, it's a lovely thing, and I think hippies have done a great service to America. I mean, Whole Foods wouldn't exist without them, and goodness knows. But people get all uptight about that because we have to be structured. Structure is so important. And it's just like, well, you can be self-sufficient, and grow your own food and still have a structured life. It may not look like your structured life, And if you want to choose to have one of those real complicated lives where you have a high-powered job and you have to have like nannies and butlers and all sorts of people to make your family work, hey, if you can afford that, fine. But that's the life you're choosing. Now, I would like to choose something a little more the scale again. I prefer a more human scale for where I'm at, you know.
Right.
And I think a lot of children would benefit by us coming around to shrinking schools, you know, and school size and figuring out, like, I mean, one of the things that's happening sort of organically are micro schools and learning pods. Yes. They came out of the COVID, but before then there were homeschooling co-ops. I mean, parents realize you need a break. Everybody needs a break. So, you know, let's work with other parents, you know, who are in the same boat and try and figure this out. And schools could be like a central node for that. You know?
Yes,
but
a resource space. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want it to be. They're too professional. It's all about instruction. You know, health and welfare. Oh, they have their own political. But you can't learn well if your health is bad. If your family's poor, you're not going to learn as well as a family who's wealthy. You know, I mean, there's, you know, if you don't have the clothes and medical care, I mean, we just, this idea that education is in and of itself a subject that you know we all must succeed at is crazy. It's connected.
All connected.
To go back to Illich, he pointed out, you know, the root word of education is educare, which means to nourish. You know, it's not educere, which a lot of people, which means to lead forth, to pull forth. You know, and you know, big difference between nurturing a child and pulling them. You know?
So interesting you say that, because I did study Latin because I was doing classical homeschooling in the beginning. And what I remember, educato means to raise up, something like that. So educaro, nourish, to raise. I just love that. Okay, so reason to study Latin.
I mean, you know, again,
in your spare time.
Yeah, that's what I appreciate about Ivan's work is, you know, he shows you that the origin actually
isn't it all what's happening?
And
I love that.
Yeah, we've corrupted it. I mean, there's a Latin phrase you will quote all the time, but translates to the corruption of the best is the worst. And that's what he feared was happening in the church and in society.
Wow, very interesting.
And move on there.
I was going to say that could be its own discussion. All I want to leave on, and by the way, I absolutely value this conversation for myself, and I really appreciate having the conversation. If you ever want someone to dig into the deep things, let me know, because I'll be happy to do that. Also, you can, whoever is engaged in the conversation today, you're welcome to throw in comments down below, and we're happy to continue the conversation either here in the Homeschool Mama Support Group on Facebook, or also on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, the Homeschool Mom and Wellness and Mindset Coach channel. But I wanted to say this, that I had my language around child. I would often say we want to pursue child-led learning. And I actually, because I know as families, as parents, we do want to share certain things with our kids. We want to say, hey, this is an important thing. Let's talk about this. Or I want you to know something. Then people are scared to pursue unschooling. And that is what I often hear. And I go, okay, well then just, you know, if you have to change the language, then just say child-inspired learning, or change whatever works for you. But just you're educating the child in front of you. That is. I'd love your thoughts.
I couldn't agree more. You know, the language really gets in the way, but you know, we really just have to. Ultimately, it is just you and the child in front of you. Yeah, and that's the reality of the situation. Enjoy it. Don't lament it. And if you do lament it, you have options. Go back to school, you know, or something. But you know, I mean, don't make your child miserable because you know you're miserable. You know, it's like we have more options, but it's difficult in a world where you know everyone has to have a job. I mean, right? I mean, I've often heard children's job is to be good students. It's like their job is they don't have jobs. They're children. They are growing. They will get
Yes.
a job when they're 16 or 18.
Yeah.
But please.
Yes. Well said. Besides pointing people to your website, which I would ask you just let me know what your website is again, although I know it.
Sure.
But and where they can find this 8 points or 8. Did you title it 8 important
John
points?
Holt's 8 great ideas about unschooling. You
Beautiful.
can find that on my website when you sign up for the newsletter. The quickest way to do it would be to go to www.johnholtgws.com/ebook, and you'll be presented with this, so you can download it after you enter your email.
Thank you. It's always a delight to chat with you, Pat. And
Same here,
just
Teresa.
I hear you chat about the moments you had with John Holt and the moments you've had with Ivan Illich. And now I feel like I'm in that space of being able to share that space with you and the work that you and everyone at Growing Without Schooling is doing. I'm so grateful for it because it has a huge impact on the culture, not just on education alone. So let me know if you ever want to have a chat in some other context, but truly I'm grateful for the work you're doing.
Well, thank you, Teresa. And I truly enjoyed our conversation again. So yes, we'll be in touch.
Okay.
All right.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much. Bye.